All right, so the interim budget will be presented by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman tomorrow. But before that, what are the expectations of young entrepreneurs across the country? Let's talk to them and try and get a perspective. I'm joined by Chetan Kasim. He's a Tile co-founder. He's the CEO of Sustainext Digital Private Limited. Chetan Kasim, thank you very much for speaking with Mirror Now. Good evening. First of all, help us understand what your company really does. Your area of work is related to environment, I believe.
That's correct. So what we basically do is, so we operate in the ESG tech sector. So we are an ESG platform, like a SaaS-based ESG platform. So basically help companies, handle all aspects of environment, social, and governance.
Chetan, obviously the budget is going to be presented by the finance minister. The obvious question is, what are your expectations?
Shreya, look, number one, as a software provider that technically focuses on the ESG side of things, it's very, very important that companies realize and sort of understand the importance of ESG data, right? Because if you do not have the sustainability data in place, it's just not going to make a lot of sense to even implement those kind of decarbonization solutions, right? So it just goes. So it's sort of a scenario wherein you're talking about implementing solar panels, right? But then the very first question you got to ask yourself, why would I do that? I mean, if my business is not technically causing a lot of harmful impact to the environment, right? So I think it's those kind of things that companies need to think about. But for companies to be able to do that, I think it's the government that technically needs to sort of create that sort of awareness. I think the large organizations already know what they're doing. They've had those plans in place for a very long time. So similar to how India has a net zero target of 2070, you have a lot of these companies, the larger ones, obviously the listed entities who have their net zero targets, maybe 2040 or 2050. But then when you start talking about the MSME sector, and that is probably the biggest challenge that we've all got to think about, right? Because it's easier for companies to handle their own carbon footprint, because that is scope 1 emissions and scope 2 emissions. However, when you start talking about that supply chain, that value chain, I mean, that is the biggest problem of it all, right? So I think, and that is India's biggest contributor, right? It's the MSME sector. So I think if you start focusing on them and you start probably, introducing certain incentive schemes, whether that was on training or certification related programs, or even incentives for ESG software deployment, I think that would obviously, not necessarily level the playing field, because it's not really competition over here, right? We're not saying we're competing with the hardware providers. I mean, we absolutely need them. I mean, because end of the day, we are a data management and a reporting provider. So we're bringing in that transparency, we're bringing in those disclosures, which the world really needs. However, when you don't have those hardware implementation providers, none of this even matters in the very first place. So I think it's more collaboration over here. But from what we've seen in the past, there has been a lot more focus on the hardware OEMs versus the software providers, right? So that was obviously one point. The other thing that I technically wanted to sort of touch upon was the GST rate. So currently, it's capped at 18%. But if that could technically, be brought down to anywhere between 7 to 10%, I think that would also make this very attractive, right, for companies to technically embark on that journey. So yeah, I guess these would probably be our main expectations.